Hello, how are you? Welcome again to our today's class, which is going to give more focus on gender and sexuality concept, but our main focus will be on gender versus sex. I realize that most of the time you'll find people either they're using these words interchangeably or they generally do not understand what these words mean in their own definition in the correct way. So we're going to give more focus on this and we will define more other concepts that are surrounding these two words. So again, my name is Winnie Barawa, and if you're new in this channel, this is simply a platform where we do content and lessons pertaining to medical causes that varies from all the sectors. But in today's class, we're just going to give more focus on gender and sexuality with a major focus on gender versus sex. So keep with me to the end. So sex, beginning with it, this is a term actually that is used to refer to physical differences or physical characteristics that are used to define between people either who are men or male, in this case female or intersex. So the definition of sex is simply based on the physical characteristics. So this refers to the physical differences between men or women or intersex. And when it comes to sex, it is purely assigned at birth based on our physiological characteristics by what was observed on our genitalia areas or based on chromosomal composition. And this sex is biologically defined. So I'd like us to get this together, that this is biologically defined. Like sex is not something that is imagined, it is what you see. So at birth, when a baby is born and the nurses or the doctors are able to see the genitalia area or the genetic composition of the child, if it is, for example, we have the XY and the XX. So the XX represent the female sex, and the XY represent the male sex. And in this case, if you observe on the genital area and you're observing presence of a vaginal composition, then you can talk about being female. Or if you see presence of penile, then you talk about male. But now we have babies who are born with both genders, then you talk about intersex. So this is biologically defined and has nothing with the social constraint. It's purely. But we now have what we call gender. And gender in this case is being referred to be a social construct. Social means it is influenced by society viewpoint, and what the society intervenes or interprets is what will be defined as gender. So this is a social construct, and it's being defined as an internal sense. This is an internal or personal sense of self, where or whether an individual sees themselves as a man, a woman, or any other identity that they prefer to be identified as. So gender is not allocated at birth, but it's an internal construct or it's an internal view of the person if they view themselves as male or female, man or woman, or any other identity that they would like to present themselves at. So it being said that gender is very broad spectrum, and this is where we had those aspects of gender identity, gender roles, all those gender aspects. So it's wide as compared to sex. Sex is just physical characteristics of what is seen, but gender is a social construct based on social definition and how people view themselves, whether as male or female or intersex or in betweens, and all the different identities that we've discussed under gender discussions. So if you've not watched our video that we did in previous class that we did on gender definitions and concepts, we had discussed so many other terms around it, including like gender identities, what it means by sexuality, all those aspects. So if you wish to know more about it, you can refer to it. I'll also put the link here so that on our description so that you can go through it, but this is a carry on from it. So let's keep on. So let's look at the differences between sex and gender. So if sex is biological and gender is social constructed. So let's look at the main part that forms our sex. So our sex is composed mostly of the anatomy, that is how we see what we are able to evaluate in our body. It's composed of our physiological functions, it's composed of our genetics, and it's composed of our hormones. These are biological composition. We cannot undo this we are already born with it. But with gender, gender is being influenced by society, and it's being influenced by society point of view, such that it will compose of issues like identities and expressions. There'll be gender roles and norms, power relation. We'll talk about gender equity and gender equality. All these aspects are what brings out gender. So gender is socially constructed. It is broad in terms of our spectrum, while sex is simply based on our anatomy, the physiology, and how the genetics are put together. So I hope that makes sense for both of us. So when we now talked about the difference between gender and sex, then it means as a person you need to be very, very gender sensitive now. By gender sensitivity, we mean a process by which the person is made aware of how the different aspects we view of gender plays a very big role on how we should treat others. So this means as a person you need to avoid being gender biased and being gender sensitive. Gender sensitive means you are very aware that gender has a big influence on how we will treat others and how you will view others in our normal day-to-day lives. For instance, you find people who are gender biased, they will speak of using very gender insensitive language or defining situations that will have required decorum when you're referring to gender, but people become just insensitive and just say what they want. For example, in the first sentence here about Jen and Mary, someone may decide to say, or someone who is biased may decide to say Jen and Mary both have full-time jobs, but he helps, or rather say John helps her with housework. Now, for someone who is very gender aware, will actually be able to detect the state of biasness that is in that statement, especially the last statement where this person is saying he helps with housework. Now, in the current world where everything is evolving and people are embracing gender equality and development, referring to housework as a lady-based work or as a female described kind of role, then that makes us very gender biased. So as a person who is gender sensitive and aware, then we'll refer to situations like this. Instead of saying he helps, he will say John and Mary both have full-time jobs, but they share the housework. So this brings a sense of where the person is gender sensitive and aware, and they appreciate that in the current world where people are embracing gender roles, then there's a sense of equality and sharing. So this becomes a gender sensitive person. So gender sensitivity is just a matter of understanding that gender has a very big role on how things happen, and as a person you should embrace sensitivity to live in harmony with other people. So we have a few principles that can assist us in establishing gender sensitive communication, or ensuring that at least in our daily interactions we're ensuring that we are gender aware and sensitive at the same time. So for instance, just learn to challenge gender stereotype here. Try to challenge the gender stereotypes that we know. Like, avoid assuming what you already know about men and women. Don't assume that all men go to war. Don't assume that all women cook. Avoid assumptions. Then the second thing is, try at least to understand that in your statement, ensure there's a representation of both men and women. Avoid one-sided or unilateral statements that tends to always either take a side of men or women. Just embrace both genders at both times, and avoid exclusionary forms. Avoid addressing people with their labels. You can't always be saying in this class, there are men and women. Just say in this class they're human beings. That being inclusive. So avoid exclusionary forms. Instead, use equal form of addresses also, like within public. For example, there've been so much debates about, Mrs. and Miss, and even in the in the history of all these addresses, it's being said that mostly people who use Mrs. are either referring to marriages or people who are married for the ladies, and those who are using Miss is referring to general description. So there was the history of the Miss that had an IMIS, that miss was very gender insensitive because it used to refer to people who are not married. In this case, we mean women, or women who are not married were referred as Miss. So the MISS. But now they felt like, using those target or labeled titles are kind of very discriminatory and gender insensitive. So people felt, instead of using Mrs. or Miss or Miss, you can just embrace one word, call all women just Miss, because with Miss, it neither refers to their marital status, it neither refers to any social construct that they have. It's just a neutral word that refers to any person who is Miss and would like to be addressed by a title. Of course, there are other people who prefer titles like being called doctor, being called a professor, and being called even the Miss if that's the choice that they have chosen to be identified as. So avoid any discriminatory forms or addresses, just use equal forms, but also create gender balance in your words. Instead of using outdated terms, like saying mankind, mother tongue, a motherland, I use neutral words, like humankind instead of mankind. Use native language instead of mother tongue. Create gender balance in your languages. And using terms that are gender equal, or terms that demonstrate gender equity or equality, like in the nursing fraternity, for example, there's a lot of bias, especially when you talk of nurses. If it's a female nurse, you always just refer to her like a nurse. But then if there's an input of the male, they'll always call them like male nurses or female doctors, and it's just a bit insensitive in a way, because all these are professional at the end of the day. So if you do not wish to sound insensitive, you can just use the word professional, which becomes very balanced, and nobody will not have to feel like they're being judged or being labeled as because of who they are. But now, where there's gender sensitivity, there's gender responsiveness. So a responsiveness is the outcome that reflects that people actually having an understanding of gender roles, all right? There's understanding that people are getting on gender roles, there's an understanding of inequalities, and people are making an effort to ensure there is equal participation and fair distribution of benefits. So here we have equal participation, we have fair distribution of benefits. And in cases of gender responsiveness, then in this case, people are expected to participate in what we call gender analysis and gender inclusiveness. So we are able to bring on board each and every person who has a role to play in this aspect of gender responsiveness. So you are understanding that with gender responsiveness, we want to embrace the outcomes that are showing that understanding of gender roles and inequalities, and we're able to make efforts to encourage equal participation and fair distribution of benefits. So how do we acquire, or how do we achieve gender responsiveness? Through gender analysis and gender inclusiveness. But now there's the elephant in the room, where there's discrimination or gender discrimination, where we say in gender discrimination, this is a situation in which people are treated differently simply because they're just male or female. So you decide you're not going to treat people fairly, or you're not going to treat people with respect, because you simply decided this you're male or female, so I'm going to disrespect you as much as I want based on the gender that I'm seeing, or based on the sex that I'm seeing. So people are being treated unfairly based on the gender that they are, and rather treating them on the basis of their individual skills, characteristics, or capabilities. So discrimination disregards your work up skills, it disregards your capabilities, it disregards who you are, and treats you based on one thing, the gender that you are. So there's this video that is really touching, and I felt like it's good to share it. I don't own the rights to this video, and if you want to access it, it's been published on the European Institute for Gender Equality, what is commonly known as AGE, and it has very good content on gender discrimination, gender equality, and all approaches pertaining to it. So I'll play it so that you can see how gender discrimination can be a pain, actually, when it really affects you directly.
Hva tenker du, Felicia? Vi har jobbet helt likt, og så får vi ikke det samme. Vi var like flinke, og vi burde få like mye.
Hvorfor det?
Fordi ellers så blir det urettferdig. Det er liksom ikke forskjell på jente og gutt, da. Jeg tenker at det er feil.
Hvorfor er det feil?
Jenter er ikke mindre verdt enn gutter. Det har ikke noe å si hvis man er gutt eller jente. Sånn, jeg tror det er like mye nå. Nei. Nå har vi like mye. Nå har vi like mye.
So as you watched from this video, you can see the shock on the children when they are seeing their last pay after all the work they have done is actually equal. So now in the eyes of discrimination, it's whereby we just reward you or we. So on the other aspect here is the gender stereotypes. And under gender stereotypes, we are saying this is an aspect whereby a person holds a generalized view or misconception about attributes or characteristics or the roles that ought to be possessed or by performed by women and men. So this is mostly like beliefs that people hold pertaining to particular gender, and in all that they have hold on to it as the truth according to their own beliefs. So with gender stereotype, unfortunately, sometimes it can be very limiting because it can be harmful into either of the genders based on how much they are being implemented. And it's unfortunate that it's affecting a lot of both men and women in terms of people developing their capabilities, pursuing their promotional careers, and even making choices on general life or generally daily living choices. So with gender stereotype, because this aspect is based on someone's view and preconception, sometimes it becomes so hard to just break that stereotype and allow someone to think outside their own boxes that they belong to. So it takes a lot of culture change to change someone's stereotypes or beliefs to enable them to see the bigger picture. So in the next slide, I just want us to. So if we do not properly manage stereotypes and we allow them to run around with us without properly putting it in its place, then we have results of violation of human rights and fundamental freedoms. For example, in presence of stereotypes, you can have people losing rights to access to proper health, lack of adequate standard of living, people losing education rights, people having poor marriages and family relations, poor work ethics and professionalism, loss of freedom of expression, loss of freedom of movement, poor political participation and representation, ineffective remedies, and lack of freedom from gender-based violence in our community. So if stereotypes are not properly or if they're wrongly handled, then we have violation of all these rights. This is the place where you find these rampant gender-based violent cases in our community, poor political participation, mostly from women, and low education participation on the women or men. And these are aspects that we can't ignore, especially if you're looking at a country or a community that is development focused. So we've seen how these concepts flow. So we had all the way from gender sensitivity to gender responsiveness, and you've seen how gender discrimination can work. And now here we are looking around stereotypes, but stereotypes also are guided mostly by gender roles, which are also known as sex roles. And it's unfortunate that our society has created a range of behaviors and attitudes that are generally considered acceptable, appropriate, or desirable based on the person's biology or perceived sex. So, gender roles, by definition, are social roles or range of behaviors and attitudes that are generally considered acceptable, appropriate, or desirable for a particular biological sex, such that you find with a gender role there's an attribute that is allocated to male and there's an attribute that is being allocated to the boys or girls. So, for example, by gender role and socialization, the boys mostly are being seen as more active, aggressive, tough, daring, dominant, and so on. But when it comes to the girls, there's that approach where the girls should be, a little bit feminine, presenting with softness, emotional state, sweet, and submissive. But we're forgetting that these are just social roles, these are sex roles, these are roles defined by society. And it's not putting into consideration that at some moment we can have some girls who are very active and aggressive and tough and daring. And you can have boys who are just sweet and submissive and all that. So the gender roles are not cut on stones. And with gender roles, it's a bit confusing because they generate what we are going to discuss on the next slide, what we call gender expectations. So gender roles, they birth what we call gender expectations. They put us in this box where because you're female and these were the sex roles that were aligned to the female, then you're supposed to expect her to behave in this particular manner. So gender expectation is the list of things that are automatically attributed to originate from a particular gender or sex. So, for example, the female, she's supposed to act like a lady, being polite and demure, be soft and nice. For the boy, he's expected to be a man and never cry. But, should everybody just be expected to act how they want as individuals? Because this is not being realistic, because people are different, people express their emotions differently, people behave differently based on how they have been exposed as men or women and even the community that they live. So these expectations create biases, create unnecessary collusion and confusion. And so as much as the society has generated gender roles and now they are presenting with gender expectations, we need to always prepare for change. And this change can come in different formats. And the change can come in terms of reversal and new trends. So there are so many changes coming in terms of gender and sex currently, including men developing interest for what was stated as feminine traits, while for ladies are also having this new reversal of roles and expectations, and ladies are embracing what was previously treated as male kind of attributes. So with gender reversal and trends currently, there's more coming up, and all genders are just taking in new roles, new trends, and new development that favors what works for them and not necessarily what the society has described. So that was it for today when it came to gender and sex and understanding the differences that pertains to it. So if you like this classroom that we are doing, you can click on the subscribe button, click also on the notification bell so that when you post another class, you can be the first person to be notified to join the class on time or in advance. So thank you so much for keeping it all the way to the end. See you in our next classroom. Bye bye.